I'm right in it. I'm not going to watch the scope. I'm just going to try to swing through and feel it. Now, problem with swinging through without getting bites is it'll pull fish out away from the structure. There we go. That's a pretty good one right there. But it'll pull fish out away from the structure. Oh, that's why it's so good. Look at there. So, double rig. Talking about double rig. I don't think that top one's a keeper, that bottom one is. We'll look and see, but two at a time. We finally found a good school. Hey guys, welcome back to In It for the Living Fishing. Today we're going to talk about the double rig. Now this is a rig that I've been fishing since I was 5 years old, so going on 40 years now. And over that time I've changed it up and adapted it a little bit. Started out probably using a clinch knot, a modified clinch knot when I was younger, which isn't the best knot for this type of rig, which evolved into 2 polymer knots, and now I use a couple loop knots, and I'll show you the specific knots here in just a minute when we tie on. But we're just going to talk about the thought process behind it, how I tie it, and talk about the different presentations as far as swinging it through a bed, if we're going vertical with it, or doing sort of like a drop shot rig. And I'll talk about my thoughts behind all that. So we're going to get to it. Let's do it. Found a good school here. Let's get a picture. My neater picture. I don't think that top one's gonna keep. We'll just we're not keeping them anyways, but I just want to see for record purposes. So sometimes with the double rig, the purpose of the double rig is not necessarily catch 2 at a time. That's not my main purpose. Let's go ahead and measure this one and get in the water. I'm pretty sure this one, well, that's not what I wanted to do. Pretty sure this one's a keeper. He's 11 and a half. So that's 11 and a half one. Which this one might actually be a keeper. He's probably 9. Let's be careful not to mess his eye up here. All right, so let's look. He's close. About 9 and a half. Not quite a keeper, so that's one throwback so far. So that's not the purpose of the double rig, catching 2 at a time. That's not my purpose of fishing the double rig, but it is nice when it happens. All right, guys, let's talk about jig heads. So you can use whatever jig head you want as far as style. I like these sickle hooks. Typically I like a red hook or a gold, and these minnow head designs I like a lot too, but the ball head's fine too, and I do use these. On this hook size, I do like a bigger hook. I do have smaller ones, but I do like a size 2, at least on the hook. So a little bit bigger hook size for crappie. I'll downsize if I get into a school of bluegill. As far as weight goes, I always use a 1/16 ounce. Usually, if I'm trying to get real deep, I'll just bump up to 1/8 of an ounce. But I'll use a 1/16 for both of them, which equals a total of 1/8, which is what I normally use if I'm using a single jig. unless I need a real slow presentation. I'd like to use the exact same weight. Some people will go heavier on one end. If you go heavier on, it depends on what the presentation you want. If you go heavier on the top, it's going to be swinging and pulling this back hook through. And if you go heavier on the bottom, it's going to kind of pull the top hook through. I like to go the exact same weight, which is a 1/16. All right, guys, let's talk about knots. So this first knot that I'm going to do, and I've showed this before, call it a T-knot. I got it from Shannon. I'm not sure where he got it, but you just feed your jig through, and I like to leave quite a bit of tag in, which is why my reel's always empty. And you're gonna loop it, twist a loop in the line like this. Okay, and I'm gonna pull it tight and hold it right here, and I'm gonna grab one of these lines and wrap it around the other 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then you're gonna take your hook and jig and pull it all the way through that loop in the center there. And then I'm gonna hold it and kind of, sorry, I gotta wet it. You do want to wet it because you don't want to burn it. And then you're gonna pull it tight. The reason we call this a T-knot is because it makes a little T, and you can see how that hangs off a little bit from the line, and that's going to keep it from hanging up in the line as much. That's why I use that one on top. Now for the bottom one, the bottom knot is going to be a very simple loop knot, and I just call it a Richard G knot because that's where I got it from. There's a ton of different ways to tie a loop knot. I find this to be probably one of the easiest ways to do it. So you just feed your line through, get your distance the way you want it. And I always leave about 1.5 feet, 2 foot. That's on my tag end. So you're gonna feed it through and then twist it around your 2 fingers and then come in through 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Now another little trick to this is hooking it right here on your thumb and pulling down to keep it tight. And then when you get the loop the way you want it, the distance you want, then you pull it off. Now I know, see all this I gotta cut off? That's okay. I don't mind going through a little bit of line. I'm not trying to save any line or anything. Hope you can see that in my shadow. If not, I'll have to redo this all at home. All right, so I got 2 loop knots. So when it comes to the water, it'll hang horizontal, and that's the goal. Is that, see how they hang horizontal right there? So that's the goal of the loop knots. All right, let's talk about bait selection. So to get into that, we're gonna have to talk about my thought process behind the double rig. Now, when I was younger, when I first started using this, I was probably 5 years old, and my dad showed me how to tie this. And we would tie 2 lead head jigs. Sometimes we'd even put it under a float and cast out on the nullichucky when the stripe were running, and we'd catch hundreds of stripe that way, 2 at a time. So the reason the modified clinch knot, which is what I used to use for it, doesn't work so well is when you get a big fish on that bottom hook, it can cut through that top knot on the top jig. So you want to use something that's not a cinch knot that's going to sit you down and cut itself. The polymer knot is a really good knot, and if I'm bass fishing or fishing for something bigger, I will use the polymer knot. I'll use 2 polymers, and even if I'm crappie fishing and reeling in, I'll use a polymer if I want something tight to the jig, just because it's stronger. The loop knot is not a strength knot, but it is a purpose knot, and the purpose with the way that I usually fish it is to keep that bait horizontal. So it's not a strength knot, but it'll usually hold up to most crappie that you're going to catch. You're going to have to keep it in mind though, if you're fighting a big crappie, you can adjust that with your drag or your rod tip, depending on what type of rod you use. Now, the idea, the way that I fish the double rig with the top bait is a lot like fly fishing. Sometimes when you're fly fishing, I know up in the Smokies or when I'm fishing the Clinch River, sometimes you'll use a stimulator or a teaser on the top, and then you'll fish something below the water, like a nymph or something, to actually catch the fish with, but you're trying to get the fish's attention. So what I do on that top one is I treat it like a teaser or a stimulator, and I will use something. And as far as when I say like something bright, it depends on the water that you're fishing. So on Loudon, where it's a little murky, I'm gonna use something that's very bright like a chartreuse. Some people like pink and other things. This outlaw color, I like it. It's a little bit different chartreuse. And let me turn it this way so you can see a bit better. So this Moglow, I always call it Mojo. You'll hear me say that all the time. It's Moglow, the outlaw color. It's a little bit different type of chartreuse, and I like that color a lot in murky water for that top jig because it's very bright. Now, if I'm fishing Teleco or somewhere that's a little clear, I'm going to use natural colors, but the bright or the teaser that I'm throwing in is going to be in the flakes, either a red flake or a some of those ice flakes, just something that'll shine, that'll catch the sun in the water. And that in the clear water, I'm looking for something that's just going to catch that light a little bit, and sometimes it's even just more of a white, some white into the lure that'll catch the fish's eye. But I'm just looking for something that'll catch the fish's eye. But on the bottom, which is the target, I always use a natural bait, either a live minnow or I'll use a gulp minnow or something like that. Now, if they're hitting so crazy that it doesn't matter, I will use two of the same baits, or I'll sometimes switch it up and play with colors a little bit on that bottom one. But most of the time, like 80 to 90% of the time, that bottom is going to be a gulp bait or a live minnow, or a dead minnow for that matter, because a lot of these presentations, the minnow doesn't even have to be alive for it to work. It's just something natural on the bottom. So top, I tiered it as a teaser, and the bottom, I'm treating it as my target bait with the live bait. All right, as far as actual style bait goes, that is up to you. It's more about the fisherman's confidence than anything. It's the same way with color. All right, let me be a little bit more clear here. Confidence is important. However, it also is important to pay attention to the fish's behavior. If they are very tight-lipped, you're going to need something that's very subtle. If they're very active, you're going to want something that's a little bit has more action to it, like a curly tail or a paddle tail. You might even want to upsize that profile if you're trying to upsize the fish. So you might use something like a beaver tail or even a mini fluke. The reason I like these fry style baits is because they're typically the size of the forage, and you can do both presentations. If you dead stick this bait, you can keep it very subtle. However, with a little bit of twitching, it also gives it a lot of action. All right, let's get back to it. I always say color doesn't make a difference until it does, then it makes a big difference. If they're honing in on specific colors, then it will make a big difference. But most of the time, color is just going to depend on water clarity. Now, there are all kinds of different baits. I like using these Bobby Garland fry style baits. I use a lot of different brands besides Bobby Garland, but they're the ones that has this color that I like. So I just rigged that up on top, and that'll sit through the water horizontally. I think I got that in on camera. Then on the bottom, I'm just going to rig a minnow up, and just to cover all bases, just to show you, this minnow's pretty much almost dead. I've just run it through its under and all the way through like that, so that when it comes to the water, it's just pulling it like this. All right, guys, let's talk about presentation. Now, some of these presentations I'll show you on the scope, but don't think this is a scope technique. It's not specific to the scope. In fact, I've only had a scope for a year, but I've been fishing the double rig for close to 40 years now, and this just comes from before that. In fact, the first presentation that I'll talk about is swinging, when I swing it through a bed, and that actually comes from when I would throw out buoys. So what I would do when I got this down imaging up front here, I've had down imaging for about 5 or 6 years. I've had scope for about a year. So when I would mark a bed with my down imaging, I'd come across it. As soon as I'd hit one in, I'd toss a buoy out, and I've got some early videos with me doing that. And then when I came on the other side of it, I tossed another buoy out, just so I'd know, where the bed was in between, so other people on the boat would know too. And what we would do is it takes a lot of guesswork, but we'd try to pitch past in between the two buoys. We'd pitch past it so it would swing through and cover multiple depths. And so when I got about 1.5 feet here, a little less than 2 feet, that you're coming through that water column, and I would adjust my pitches to that buoy a little further each time until I got bit, and then I'd kind of guess each time coming through. And we'd mark where the fish were, and we came over it, which buoy it was closer to and whatnot. And that's how we do it before scope. So Don't think this is scope specific. So we found a decent school. One of the things I was saying is when you get to a school like this, you got to be careful swinging through it, especially when you cast at a distance. I'm staying about 25 foot off right now. You swing through without getting a bite. Sometimes you'll pull out the fish away from the cover and then they'll scatter more. And they're going to scatter as you catch them too, but they look kind of active. I don't know. So I just pulled one away and then he turned. So now with down imaging, you'd come over across this bed, mark it, throw your buoy out, and kind of mentally look at your image where you came across it. You can come back over it, but I try not to pass over it too many times, and gauge about where the bed is in relation to the buoy, and then just cast past it and swing over it. That is how I'm usually fishing this rig, this setup. Just swinging it through, casting out and just letting it fall through on a pendulum. So I tighten my line up. I'm just letting it fall all the way through. And I'm coming right at the top of the bed now. If I want to go a little bit deeper in the bed, I'm going to cast a little bit further out and let it swing a little bit deeper through. There we go. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. We got a mixed bag special in here. Again, this is a decent bluegill. So this size bluegill you'd want to keep. It's just a little bit too small to fillet. Good pan size though. You want to keep it whole. Clean it up and fry it up. Try this again. Cast out and swing through. Already got a looker. Got a lot of attention. Yeah. There we go. There we go. It's a crappie. I don't know if that's a keeper or not. Put him on board and see. We're not keeping them today. I'm just for statistics. I'm pretty sure that's a 9-inch fish. So now when I'm set up with the bed along next to me, and I've shown this on videos too, if I put the bed next to me, what I'll do is figure 8 it. I'll let it swing through, then I'll let it swing back, kind of like you would for muskie, but imagine much smaller scale, much slower. I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'll just drop it down, and this is a good technique if you just have down imaging. Mark the brush, and I throw buoys out actually on each side so I can visualize it, and then I just slide my boat along the side of it, and I just slide my rod to one side. There we go. Just like that. And as it swings through, just kind of swimming it through. It's not a keeper. So I'm dropping straight down. Get it into the brush. You can see my line. I'm gonna wait till that line straightens out. Don't get a bite. Take it and swing it back the other way. And all you're doing is I got it at the depth I want it. Now another thing I would do is, especially without a scope, not knowing my depth, I'd drop it to the depth where I'd get it bit. Missed it. My fingers came off. And then I would hook my line on your line saver, so you can drop it to that same depth every single time. It's just different ways to swing it. Also vertical. I see some fish, right here. If they got a vertical bite, I'll drop it just straight down on the depth I want. And then usually I'll twitch it. Now, there's different ways to find the perfect depth. You can count down to find your depth, or you can measure out with your rod. So a lot of times a popular depth for me is 9.5 foot. So what I would do is I would put the rod, I know that 3 foot is about to where my belly button is, around that area. So I put the rod to there, and this is a 7-foot rod, so that's going to give me about 10 foot if I drop this straight to the ground to my feet. So if I put this to my belly button, drop the bait to my feet, then I'm looking at about 10 foot, and I raise it up a little bit, and there's 9.5. And then what I'll do is I would loop it into the line holder right here. And so now every time when I drop down, it's going to be the same depth every time. And that's just a vertical jig technique. With the scope, you can just watch it. Now another thing I'll do, and Shannon kind of makes fun of me, is I'll use it as a drop shot sometimes when they're on the bottom. I'll let that minnow sit on the bottom and then just hold it there and wiggle that top jig and drop shot it. And I'll pull them off the bottom sometimes. We're gonna do a bit of a vertical presentation here. And go straight down now. I do think some of the crappie have spooked off a little bit. These are some bluegill hits, if I've ever felt a bluegill hit. That's schooled up on top. Let me look on the bottom here. So sometimes when you get a mixed bag like this, crappie will push off to the bottom. I like pulling them off the bottom anyways. A lot of times they're bigger. Stand the risk of getting hung up though. These guys on the bottom want to play. Little one does. Let's see what the big one does. Yep, there we go. So I got it on the bottom, which typically is a bigger fish, and it is a crappie. And that is keeper 2. He's probably about 10.5, maybe 11. Alright, so when I'm talking bottom fish, if you look at the very base there, that fish came right out of here. And he's a little bit bigger. So sometimes when you get them mixed in there, a mixed bag special, those crappie will be on the bottom. Now I pulled the ones off the top, and I noticed some of them scattered, some of those bigger marks left. Those little marks stayed, which are bluegill. I caught one. There might be a crappie right there too. There might be a couple of little fish. That looks more like a crappie though. We'll drop in and see. There's another one on the bottom too right there. So still got a couple here. There's another bed that I'm going to check out that I accidentally went over. Alright guys, I hope that helps with the double rig. Now you can technically use any 2 loop knots that you want. I do recommend the loop knots for that for the presentations that I talked about. However, I also recommend using that T-knot on the top. That will offset your jig just a little bit from your line. Other than that, you can use whichever one. I use what I call the Richard G knot because it's quick, it's simple, and you'll end up getting hung up a lot because you have 2 hooks in the water and you're fishing brush. You're going to get hung up a lot. So that's just part of it. Another thing I forgot to mention is to make sure those eyelets are closed. If they're not, you can just close it with a pair of pliers, but you get a good bite and set the hook. If that eyelet's not completely closed, it'll pop right off, and then you'll be sitting there with a nice little clean loop knot with no jig on it. So just make sure those things are cinched down. So I hope that helps give you an idea of how I like to fish the double rig, and hopefully that gave you a little something extra that you can try on your own. All right, if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. If you like what you see, hit that like and subscribe button. Till next time guys, keep chasing that limit.